Evening, people. How you doing? Welcome. Matt Phillips here, host of the Sports Therapy Association podcast, which is being, as always, recorded live. If you want to join us live, then it goes out on Tuesdays, UK time, which is currently GMT +1. And we go out live to the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel, which hopefully this week, after a little bit of a technical problem last week, wasn't happening. But that's where we go out. And this month, like last month, because it's such an important topic, we're also going out live to my other enterprise, OneChatLive.com. So it's going out to the people, the runners, and the people who work with runners on OneChat Live. So yeah, and also the big one tonight is it's episode 100. I only realised that. It actually only dawned on me about a week ago. So yeah, thank you for joining us. I would be excited for any guest to join me on episode 100, but I'm really excited that I've got Matt Fitzgerald joining us for episode 100. It seems very fitting, and that is the guest who will be joining us for part 2 of what is our Focus on Nutrition month here at the Sports Therapy Association podcast. Before we do get into that, I just want to thank last week's guest. Let's bring him up here so I can have a little think. There we go. Last week's guest was Dr. Gary Mendoza. If you listen to the podcast, obviously you can't see the images which are on YouTube. If you want to see what I'm talking about, then you can always look at all the past episodes. If you go to the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel, you can catch up. And often it's very useful because the guests will have slides and things like that. So yeah, Gary Mendoza, Dr. Gary Mendoza was here last week. Oh no, 2 weeks ago, because I had a little work thing in Prague last week, which was amazing. I won't go into that, but it was great. And yeah, so 2 weeks ago, and Dr. Gary Mendoza, a fantastic, knowledgeable guest, has been on the show before, as well as a behaviour change expert. He's also a lecturer in nutrition for sport and exercise at Bath, Spa and Cardiff Metropolitan Universities. And he came on the show to open up our focus on nutrition, talking about the relevance of behaviour change when working with patients or clients trying to manage their weight. I think last year at Therapy Expo in Birmingham, at the Birmingham NEC, I did a little countdown of all the podcasts that we've done so far. And it wasn't in any particular order, but me personally, the one that affected me most of all was Dr. Gary Mendoza, because like we said last week, you can try and tell someone how to do anything. You can give them advice on strength training, rehab, diet, sleep. You can get them all the advice you want, but if you don't know whether they're ready to take that advice, if you don't know whether they're going to listen to you or what stage they are in being able to change their habits, then what's the point? You know, and this is why I think we lose so many clients, why they don't come back, why adherence to exercise we know is so notoriously poor. So it's a topic which I think is undervalued. And if you go to Gary's websites, you'll see that he is the man who can offer you courses in understanding behaviour change. So if you go to stagesofchange.co.uk, there's loads of free material on there, like we said last week, about behaviour change and recognising at what stage your client is. And there's also details, loads of videos there as well, all free CPD. Just before you start sending me more emails about what's the best CPD out there. Well, the best CPD is the free stuff normally, as long as it's quality. But there's also details about the courses he runs, and also a free behaviour change booklet, which a few people have mentioned to me. What a great free resource, which you can print out and give to your clients or just look at yourself. So yeah, that was last week. Enough of keeping him downstairs in the lobby. I'm really excited on part 2 of our Focus on Nutrition to introduce hopefully to some of you, if you aren't aware of him, Matt Fitzgerald. I've had the pleasure of chatting to Matt a couple of times on OneChat Live podcast. He was one of my guest speakers on OneChat Live International Conference last year, which was the online version. It's fascinating seeing Matt Fitzgerald talking with Spanish translation going on simultaneously. It's almost like it's coming out of his mouth, just in a female voice. But yeah, so that's all there for you as well. And I'm really excited because I still talk to runners and say, you've read some of Matt Fitzgerald's stuff, and the answer is no. And that just reminds me, my little peeve with social media is that we just live in our own little bubbles. I live in a bubble where I imagine that if you're a runner or you work with runners, then you have got at least 6 or 7 books by Matt Fitzgerald on your shelf. You've probably got, like myself, I have 2 shelves devoted because they stretch across one and double down onto the next one. Not to mention all the magazines and all the online articles and everything else. So really thrilled to bring him here tonight, and hoping that either the people who join us live or people who download are not familiar with him, because it's going to open a massive door of information and knowledge to you, to help you, not just with nutrition, but everything to do with running. So I think that's all of the spiel out of the way. I think without further ado, then I'll do what I suggested and bring up Matt Fitzgerald. Hey Matt, how you doing?
Doing all right. Glad to be here.
I'm so glad you are here. I hope I haven't made your head kind of swell too much with that, but I do think you're great. There you go. I said it. And it really annoys me that people have it. I'm sure it annoys you as well, with, I don't know how many, maybe at a guess, I don't know, 30 books out there or something spanning your history since the 90s. It must be frustrating to think that some people don't know who you are and they're runners. Does it annoy you? I'm interested as much as it annoys me.
No.
Obviously not. Does it surprise you that you can get runners out there who are into running, they're looking for answers? You would have thought they would have gone to any one of the maybe 7 or 8 different respected magazines you've written for, and yet they still go, no, I'm not sure who Matt Fitzgerald is, never heard it. Why is he any good?
No, actually, my perspective is still, because I have been me my whole life, and so for the first 30 some odd years of my life, nobody knew who the hell I was, and so that's what I'm used to. So I'm still kind of amazed when anybody does know who the heck I am or has
so
read one of my books. Yeah, but it's true.
So very humble. Yeah, I guess you put it that way. Yeah, there was a time when you weren't on bookshelves everywhere, but yeah, really excited you're here, and thank you so much to join us on the topic of nutrition, which is one of your specialities within endurance sports, as well as everything else that goes with it. Just to let people know, if you're watching us live, I can see people have come in already. If you do have questions, well, first of all, thank you for joining us. I can bring you up on the screen, like Gary Benson, founder of the Sports Therapy Association, is in the room. And if you're watching YouTube now, you can see there is Gary saying, good evening all. Also, we're joined, Andy Glover is here. Evening, glad you're back. Thank you, Andy, it means a lot. Happy 100, thank you very much, mate. Thank you for joining us. Elaine G is here, thanks for joining us, Elaine G, and so on, and people are coming in. Sabrina Monaghan, hey, how you doing? Sabrina says hi, everyone. And as I say, if you have got questions, then stick them in there. I'll bring it up on the screen. I've told Matt that if he does see something interesting more than what I'm talking about, he's welcome to jump in and say, oh, Elaine's got a good question there, and I shall bring it up on the screen. So there we go. Right, Matt, so I did make a little screenshot. Actually, I don't want to go on about, it's like, I feel like I'm going on too much about how much you've done here, but I did do a fantastic little screenshot, just of, not even all the books you've written. I don't know whether this is going to make you feel old. There's about 4 missing off there, which came before then. But for people watching the YouTube video, there is here like a 3, 6, 9, 12, I don't know, about 30 books up there, spanning all the way from, I think the first book I got from you was The Brain Training for Runners, which I think, if my memory serves you right, was back in 2006. That was one of the earlier ones, although there was a few before then. And that spans all the way through. People are probably familiar maybe with, let's have a think. 80-20 running is a massive one, although I've just jumped forwards about 12. You're probably familiar with the 80-20 principle. I know if you're a runner, you probably come across that. If you want to know more about it and understand it and where it comes from, then check out the 80-20 running by Matt Fitzgerald. Diet Cults homes in a lot for what we're talking about. That was a fantastic book as well, which introduced me to the nutrition side of things from Matt, and that's there as well. And for training books and plans and advice and coaching, there's so many there as well. I'm not going to even name, there's about 3 or 4 up there, which I'll definitely. Run Faster was a great one for me. That came at a time in my life when I was particularly trying to help other runners, and there's amazing plans from all the way from 5K to marathons in the back there. And then we go on, we've got Life as a Marathon, which was the subject of one of the chats I did with Matt on Run Chat Live podcast, which is an amazing book, opening up personal issues in Matt's life throughout his career when he was writing. The Comeback Quotient, Running the Dream, talking about Matt kind of cracking his PB from God knows how long ago and getting it and training with the Hoka Elites. It's an amazing book as well. And Run Like a Pro is the most recent one, which we'll talk about shortly. So a lot for you to think about. I'm interested, we're homing tonight on the nutrition side of things, Matt. What stage did nutrition, because you're a nutritionist yourself, When did that come? Was that because of personal interest, or was it because you were already looking and studying elites yourself and thought this is interesting, or when did it arrive for you?
Yeah, for me, my interest in nutrition, it wasn't it wasn't like a lifelong passion the way training was. I mean, that I was just into from the get-go. Nutrition I got into for a couple reasons. One, I realized it mattered, to my own performance as an athlete. I grew up on the standard American diet, and then went away to college, and it's anything goes in college. Pizza and cheese cutlets for dinner at the dining center, and so when I was feeding myself, my diet just went sideways, and so that was my starting point when I really got serious about running a triathlon. So I decided to just get serious about nutrition for my own sake. And went through this process of changing the way I ate, and so through that process, I developed kind of a broader interest in nutrition. And in the endurance milieu that I've been in forever, I noticed that the way I was going about trying to improve my diet and improve my performance through my diet was not what a lot of other people were doing. I thought I looked to my left and to my right and saw a lot of people just like overcomplicating things and chasing bright shiny objects, whereas my approach is very simple. I looked at the winner of the race, looked at the breakfast, lunch, and dinner plates of the winner of the race, and said, I'm going to eat like that guy or that gal. That was my approach, and I saw a lot of other people going for fad diets, supplements, the latest greatest thing. So I got into writing about nutrition as a way to sort of help people just see hey, it's easier than that. Just do what I'm doing, and what I'm doing is what the elites are doing.
It's interesting because I know people out there already from talking to therapists and coaches. They're probably saying, but you can't look at the elites. The elites are genetically gifted and they're a whole different crop of people. But I know through when you talked about Run Chat Live, and it's a passion of yours to suggest that this isn't the case, is it? Obviously the genetics will play a part, but there's no reason why we need to put them aside and start doing things which are totally different than them.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny, even very educated people are walking around with kind of like this kind of high school level knowledge of like how genetics works. And it's not accurate, it's not really up to date, I guess is another way to put it. So, if you look at the genetics of, elite athletes in the endurance space, what's been found is first of all, they're not all the same. Within the population of elite endurance athletes, they are as different from one another as they are from us in any particular respect. Number two, it's only a handful of genes that have been identified that sort of seem to be sort of important to have if you want to be, an elite endurance athlete. And none of them have anything to do with how nutrition is metabolized. So Joe and Jane Olympian are exactly like we are. We're all different, first of all, but I mean, they're just as human as the rest of us in terms of nutrition. What makes them different is that they're they have a sort of a naturally high aerobic capacity. So they're just, good at turning oxygen into muscle power. They're a lot of them are anthropometric. So they just have a certain body type. And then they have genes for trainability, so that they're highly adaptive to the stimulus of endurance training. But on the diet side, there's no there. So we can, and with a lot of things, not just diet, but with diet inclusive, you really can model your practices after the elites. That doesn't necessarily mean eating 5,000 calories a day, like they do, but the principles definitely do apply.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it must be human nature, because you could say the same about running forms. so the number of people who write books and DVDs saying this is the best way to run, and there's not one elite who runs like that. Or you look at 5 elites and they're all running slightly differently. And it goes for shoes, the amount of time recreational runners spend on trying to choose their shoes, and then the higher you go up and the better the runner, the least interest they've got in that. They'll just kind of,
right.
It's fascinating. It must be human nature that we kind of, the non-elites concentrate on these quick fixes. I think they're going to find something to help them become an elite rather than looking at what the elites do. So it makes a lot of sense. Look at the elites, which you've spent quite a few years doing, isn't it? I mean, you've got a lot of information. When you wrote the book, The Endurance Diet, that was your trip, wasn't it? You were traveling around and doing interviews with elites to try and get that information.
Yes, it was sort of my excuse to travel all around the world and be able to write everything off as a business expense. But yeah, so, and the fact that I got a book out of it was gravy. But yeah, I went to Brazil, I went to Canada, which isn't that exotic, but I got to hang around with elite cross-country skiers there, which is pretty cool. I went to Spain, hung out with a professional cycling team. I went to Kenya. I wanted to go to Japan, but Japan came to me, as it were. A team of a women's professional running team from Japan was doing altitude training in Boulder, Colorado. So I hung out with them for a few days. So yeah, it was a pretty diverse, rich experience. Got a lot of great memories from it.
Fantastic. Okay, so the things we're going to talk about, and the questions I'm going to ask tonight, are covered quite a lot in the Endurance Diet, which was 2016, I think, around then.
I think so. Yeah, because the traveling was 2015.
There we go. Yeah.
Yep.
So if anybody's interested in this, then that's still pretty much my go-to book. But we're going to talk about that tonight. I'm also interested in, because Diet Cults, I just want to mention, is another fantastic book, which was kind of, it looked like it was more of your frustration. Oh, that frustration is the right word, because you're a real chilled out guy. But kind of just highlighting the fads and this is the one, and then next month, this is the one. No, this is the one. It's almost like a Monty Python sketch. But Diet Cults is a fascinating book as well, which will help people realize what do you hope people take away from Diet Cults, just briefly?
Yeah, I guess the thesis of the book is that food is never just food for people. That it's there's all these layers of personal identity and group belonging that are tied up in it, which makes it, which is fine. That's just human. Food is never simply food for us. But it makes it so that we're prone to not thinking rationally about food. So we all tend to think, I make science-based decisions about how to eat. Well, not really. Very few of us do. And what mainstream nutrition science has said all along is the polar opposite of what any of the the gurus that promotes a particular diet cult says, which is that there is no single best human diet. Like we are, if anything makes us unique as a species, is that we are the ultimate adaptive omnivores. It's not that anything goes for us, but there is no, it's not a matter of one false move and you're doomed with diet as a human being. You could eat any of a number of different ways that avoid breaking the unbreakable rules and basically get the same results in terms of health and performance. So, and so for me, it was just I wrote the book mainly for other people who want to get certain results from their diet, but are turned off by the messaging of the diet cults, which is, join us, this is the one true way. And I'm like, you guys are all snake oil salesmen, but there's nothing for us, there's nothing that makes the mainstream message kind of sexy. So I was trying to do that.
Oh, you managed it. I'm going to put a screenshot up because when you look at this, you can see it's the one cover which seems to stand out from the others. I think you had some problems with the cover. It wasn't the immediate kind of choice, but I'll just put them up here so people watching can see. There's Diet Cults. Look at that. Look at that. If you're listening to the podcast, you've got this jet black. It looks like it's a cult book of some form, with this toast which has been cunningly kind of carved into this shocked look face with Diet Cults underneath. Definitely stands out, but great book. And again, definitely worth buying or getting the Audible versions if you haven't read it yet. So yeah, okay. So I was listening to you then, and again, I can imagine that a lot of people working with athletes, therapists and coaches themselves, and definitely the athletes, probably think, oh well, the elites are all eating exactly the same. They're giving out measured pipettes of how much of this and milliliters of this. You know, that's what we imagine it is, probably because we've watched the films and we see kind of the Russians doing that. It's what they do. It's like they've just got measured out everything chemicals. But you've actually spent time with the elites, which is always handy when people are kind of talking about what the elites do. And that's not the case then? Is there kind of variety in what they're eating? And will they now and again eat something which you might go, really? You're having that?
Yeah, for sure. You know, part of the reason I wanted to visit a variety of different cultures is that I wanted to show that variety. You know, if there's only one proper way to eat for maximum endurance performance, so maybe it's the Japanese diet. And then like, well, but why are the Kenyans good at running? You know, and why are the Canadians good at cross-country skiing? So I wanted to show that like you can eat in a way that is culturally familiar and get where you want to go as an athlete. So that, you know, because there's this idea of like, if the best diet for endurance performance is scientific, then it's certainly not cultural in any way. But in point of fact, like you see athletes all just getting to the same level relatively in their sports, just eating in a way that is, you know, traditional for their culture. But then if you look, you know, what an interesting experience, I'm jumping ahead maybe a little bit, but when I was with a Dutch professional cycling team in Spain, I think there were 16 athletes and they were all eating their meals together there because it was a training camp. They were on the island of Mallorca. And so from a distance, they all looked like they were eating like Dutch people. So, you know, a lot of bread and stuff. But when I went around the table, and I'm sure they thought, who is this annoying gadfly American here, just with a notepad interrupting my breakfast? But what I noticed, you know, when I sort of zoomed in from 50,000 feet was that no two athletes were eating identically. And when I quizzed each athlete about, so they were all, you know, pulling from the same resources. They brought their chef with them from the Netherlands. And then when I asked them, like, well, why are you eating this and not that? They all had reasons, and they're like, you know, it might have been an allergy, or it might have been just they didn't like a certain food. So there's room for that sort of variation as well, where you sort of you know, tune into your own body and figure out what works and what doesn't work for you. But also there's room for things like preferences and even values. You know, like you can. It's a little bit harder maybe if you're like a vegan and you cut out all animal products. You have, you know, it's easier to mess up if you put those restrictions on yourself. But if those are your values, you can make that work as well. So yeah, there's lots of room for individuality and variation.
Excellent. Yeah, very interesting. And that's coming from the horse's mouth, ladies and gentlemen. So being there with the elites and all eating something slightly different. And maybe we'll touch on that again, because that's one of the 5 principal habits, isn't it, which you kind of summarize. Yep. And that's the kind of flow of the whole book, which maybe we could go on to now. Yeah, the 5 principal habits which you break things down into. So maybe, I mean, we've talked about that already. So eat individually doesn't mean eat by yourself, which is what I think might sound like to some people. Always go to a room by yourself. But that's what you're talking about. Eat what suits you, and to a certain extent, you know, where you're from, and don't be afraid to be different than the person who's next to you. Yeah. Is there anything else on that topic? I mean, I'm wondering whether sometimes what makes a champion from a country, all these elements of having something which fits in with their culture is probably a big factor. If you take away Rioja and kind of pan and stuff from the Spanish, then you probably wouldn't get a champion, because that's part of what makes them powerful. And, you know, just the same as if you're not stereotyping all the Spanish there, but they do like their Rioja and a little bit of bread with everything. But yeah, that's an important thing, isn't it? Looking at the psychology of it, which you can't separate from nutrition, can you?
Correct. Yes. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Yeah, I think on the matter of individuality, I do caution that there are diet cults that are based on the idea that on sort of this hyper individuality, where it's like, oh yeah, like look, we're all basically different species, and like you have to start from a blank slate and figure out the best way to eat for you. And that's kind of dangerous too. So you know, there are those who take the principle of individuality with diet too far, and make people just feel like terrified. It's like, what's my diet? I'm not on it yet. Like I'm not going to get any results until I, solve this puzzle. And it's like, no, it's not that serious. Basically probably what you're doing now is you're probably 85% of the way there. We just need to fine tune. And then the other thing I would like to say to just flesh out that principle is it's best to think of it as a process. So, the way you eat today, probably shouldn't be the way you eat 5 years from now in every detail. Just similar with training, like the same principles basically apply to everyone who is human, but we're also unique in terms of how we respond to training as well. Some of us have a higher tolerance for high intensity than others. Others need to kind of chip away more at building endurance more than other athletes who tend to, respond very quickly to those longer training sessions. Same things with diet. So it's best to just accept that. Like, it doesn't have to be perfect today. And in fact, it's never going to be perfect. It's sort of like this, if you embrace it, it's like this asymptotic movement, over the years toward, your perfect diet. And if you approach it that way, it sort of can be an enjoyable journey of discovery where you feel like, what I'm doing now is yielding great results, but I have, I have every reason to believe that next year I will have fine-tuned even more, and will be doing even better.
Yeah, great points. And I'm thinking as well that the implications and effect of somebody who is taking things too far to an extreme, such that they're actually suffering in the background at the expense because they believe that this is the right thing to do. This is probably going to be greater the more kind of recreation you get, isn't it? Because as you move away from the elite and move towards athletes, which probably most people listening to this podcast are working with, the effect of them forcing themselves to follow something which isn't fit in their life is really going to have a drastic effect on their running because the other components are lacking. So the message, I can see how the message gets passed down, and how if you do look at the elites and adopt these principles, it can have even more of a benefit as you move further away from the elites to the more recreational. I have no idea if that made sense at all. It made sense in my head. But anyway, yeah, I'll think about that and come back again. Becky's just managed to slip into the room. Becky Carroll is probably one of the greatest question answers in here. Becky, yeah, don't worry, I won't put on the screen or anything saying that you sneaked into the virtual room, that you're late. I won't draw any attention to it. But you have come with the questions. That's fine. Fantastic. Let's bring that up on the screen for Matt. So Becky Carroll says, have you had any experience with athletes that are fed via a feeding peg? I'm hoping you know what that is. I'm giving you 4 seconds.
I was hoping you knew.
Becky, you're gonna have to expand on that. I don't know whether you can expand on that. I've got ideas in my head. You have to come back with a expansion on what you mean by feeding peg. I've got all sorts of ideas going through my head. Come back, Becky. Well, I've got to delete that from my brain now. I'm not trying to think. Is it a spelling mistake? Is it a typo? Or anyway.
I was going to blame it on my Americanism.
No, well, it may be. Maybe I should know about it, but I don't. Anyway, so eat individually, fine. Very important point. Let's have a look at the other ones. And it's interesting because people will see these and be tempted to have their own kind of assumptions of what you're actually meaning. So I think all of them, the title doesn't give away exactly what you're talking about. Right. So let's start off maybe with eat everything, which people can be thinking, yes. What, everything? Don't starve myself with anything? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of do mean eat everything. Excuse me. Yeah, I mean, most popular diets, most diets with names attached to them are defined by the don'ts, what you don't eat. Either it's a food type or it's a type of nutrient, but you are, placing restrictions. And in both both diet cults and in the endurance diet, I take pains to show that, really, if you look at evolutionary history, like the evolution of our species is the story of a mammal becoming increasingly omnivorous. Like, that movement that famous, first bifurcation when some of our ancestors came down from the trees to the African savanna and decided to make a go of it there while others stayed in the trees. Well, that literal leap from the branch to the turf caused our ancestors' diet to diversify, because there was different food down there and more variety, and on it went from there. If you just look at our migration throughout the world from East Central Africa, it was like this expansion that, we just, by then a lot of our evolution was in place. But what made that migration throughout the entire planet, habitable planet, possible was that we could eat anything. That is why it worked, is because we could adapt to anything. And so that's what we are. And so what comes with that, just the fact that we are adaptable and we are capable of eating variedly, is that we're actually sort of dependent on eating that way. Like, we can actually only optimize our health by maintaining a very diverse diet. Like, we can't just go, eat only blueberries or only beef jerky and expect to be healthy. We need blueberries and beef jerky, and that's it. No, just kidding. There's a reason. So just bracket that, all that evolutionary just so story, and then you look at the way elite endurance athletes eat. And definitely, if you're immersed in our fad diet culture and you go spend time at the dinner tables of elite endurance athletes, that would probably be the most striking thing. Is if you followed around an elite cyclist or runner or cross country skier for a day, you would be blown away by the variety of foods in their diet. Very likely that would be the number one thing that stood out. And if you understand that evolutionary background, it kind of makes sense, right? Just like. And they have a totally different mindset. And I'm speaking in generalities, but these generalities really pretty much do apply. Like, if you just quiz your typical elite endurance athlete, they will say, no, I'm not worried about what I can't eat or don't eat. I'm trying to make sure I'm as inclusive as possible. Like, I'm going out of my way to make sure I check all the boxes and have a very well-rounded 360-degree nutrition profile in my diet. So that would be habit number one. And it's kind of a good news story, right? Like, it's like, and I also bring in the book, I mentioned some of the research showing that people naturally preferred a varied diet. That's one of the things that makes it hard to stick to a very restrictive diet. I think it's good news for a lot of athletes.
It's brilliant. It's gold for people who work with athletes here and they're looking to give advice. One, you just freeing people up from all this baggage and thinking, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And it just makes so much sense as well. You don't have to be a genius either to explain it or to understand it. So I'm hoping people take something away from that. But of course, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it wouldn't sell a book. The latest diet, eat everything. End of page, it wouldn't sell a penny,
Well, the endurance diet is not my best-selling book.
I'm sorry about that. I wasn't suggesting that. No, but what the endurance diet I think does is, it's all very well. I mean, that's the whole challenge. If all runners listen to their little voice in their head, then they probably wouldn't spend $160 or $150 on a pair of shoes. They probably wouldn't all try and run on their toes for a marathon, because their body kind of says either it doesn't matter or this hurts, but we don't listen to our little voice, do we, enough, whether it's because of the industry around or whether it's because just human nature. So it is, like you say, deprogramming, and that's the value in your book. It shows coaches and therapists and personal trainers how to have, one, the confidence to deprogram clients, or recognize that you need to deprogram, and then two, just some of the tools, like you say, the research, if people like that, and just the way of explaining it. It's not easy explaining this to people without them kind of, just like our guest was saying 2 weeks ago, just close the doors. As soon as you say this, they just close the doors and go, oh, yeah, that's interesting, and then they go back to what they're not allowed to do. Oh, hold on, right, okay, well, if Matt Fitzgerald has just disappeared from the stream for a second. I'm sure he'll be back in a sec. Just a slight internet problem, hopefully, at his end. I'm hoping Matt will come back. Just to reiterate, if you are working with clients and some of this stuff is kind of revolutioning the way you think you should approach your communication regarding nutrition and diet with them, then bear in mind it's not that simple to do. One, because no one likes suddenly making a U-turn. It makes us feel really unconfident. If previously we were saying, well, you know what, you should be fasting 4 hours in the morning and then doing this, and make sure you don't have that, because that sort of stuff sells well, and it gives us makes us feel powerful because we're giving new information out. Matt's back. Let's bring him back. I'm so glad he came back. Matt's back, but he hasn't got a camera at the moment. I'm hoping that will sort itself out in a second. Matt, I'm going to kick you out again. Oh no, you're back. You're good. My cortisone level's going up. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? Okay, well, Matt's sorting that out. He can tell me when he can hear me. But yeah, the as always with these things, it's how to get this information through to your clients, which can be so tricky. And that's where Matt's books come into it, because I don't know whether you can hear it coming through the way he explains things as a guest on the show, but you can definitely get it in his books. You can get the style of his writing. He helps me, and will therefore hopefully help a lot of you, learn how to talk to clients, how to talk to people, how to explain it in a real humble, non-assuming, non-soapbox style way. Which is the secret, isn't it? It's communication. It's everything that Dr. Gary Mendoza was saying last 2 weeks ago. I'm just going to see if I can get Matt in. I haven't got a cam for Matt, but we'll see what happens. Can you hear me, Mr. Fitzgerald?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can't. I can hear you now. Yeah, great. That's
Yay.
okay. Sorry, technology. Yeah, I was just saying, whilst you went for a little kind of disappearing act, I was just saying that one of the challenges, is how to use this information, and that's where your books, and I think listening to you kind of live like this helps, because you do have a fantastic way of explaining these things and talking about things in a real humble way. Because for a lot of therapists, let's imagine like therapists get empowered by saying the latest thing. Guess what? It's all about fasting. You need to fast for 4 hours and don't eat anything before 12 o'clock. And then make sure in the first hour you have this, because that sells. Their clients love it. And the kind of evolving therapist or practitioner, whether it's personal trainer or anything, one of the things we're trying to do on this show is give people the tools of how to kind of sometimes do a subtle U-turn, where you do kind of get rid of all that, here's what you mustn't do, and just start talking sense, but in a way that people listen. And I was just commending you, saying that you've got this flair in your books, and when people listen to you on podcasts, of just making the complex sound simple and putting it in a way which is really easy to digest, no pun intended. So yeah, so thanks for that. Right, you're back, and let's just get your name up there. We've got some questions coming in, which is great. People, if you have got questions, feel free. In fact, let's go to some of them now before we move on to the other principal habits. Yeah, I did think this. I just did have the confidence to actually mention it. When Becky was referring to a feeding peg, what she was referring to is somebody who needs their food introduced via a tube into the stomach for whatever reason. I thought it might be that, but I didn't want to kind of risk my reputation by assuming that. Have you ever worked with athletes who have got that kind of system going on?
No, I have not. I've worked with at least one athlete who was like missing a big chunk of his large intestine and had special limitations for that reason. But not a feeding peg. I would think, in principle, what you're trying to do is like, regardless of the specific constraint, you're trying to duplicate a normal diet nutritionally as closely as you can. So you accept the constraints because you can get into real trouble if you defy them. But then you look at, like the goal is still, nothing else has changed about your nutritional needs, right? So you just like, you within those limitations, you try to replicate a normal diet to the maximum degree that you possibly can.
There we go, Becky. If you have got someone like that, then maybe, shed some more light. If you're working with somebody that, have they got any restrictions, or have they been told that they should be avoiding certain foods? Obviously, there's going to be medical conditions where certain foods are ruled out or other foods encouraged. But we're kind of talking, I guess, tonight about the general athlete, endurance athlete. There There's more questions here. Let's have a little look. They're coming in fast and furious now. Brendan Turner, thanks for joining us. Brendan is asking Matt Fitzgerald, what's the maximum, oh good, calorie question, good one. What's the maximum amount of calories you can take in one go or per hour, as not to eat too much so you're just producing waste? Okay.
Yeah, the goal, the answer to that question is evolving, because it's a pretty fertile area of research right now. Because what research has shown is that during, if you take just think about endurance racing, so the competitive context with longer events, it's been consistently shown that the more nutrition, and specifically really carbohydrate, you are able to successfully absorb, the more your performance improves. So it's not like there's some easily attainable ceiling, like where it's you get to the point of negative returns, where even though you could eat more than this, don't, because your performance will start to tank. No, like if you can eat it, your performance will, if you can absorb it, your performance will improve. So the idea is that you want to consume, and we're talking about events that last more than about 2.5 hours, where it's really the more the merrier. And what has also been shown is that tolerances are kind of mutable to a certain degree, where you can kind of train your gut, and you can also manipulate what you take in order to push that threshold upward. And very, very few athletes take full advantage of, it's really free speed right there. If you do train your gut, and if you think carefully about what you take in order to maximize absorption, that is just free performance, like there for the taking. So the limit is definitely lower in running than it is in other sports, because of just the mechanical jostling of the bolus in your digestive tract. In cycling, it's up to 120 grams of carbohydrate per hour can be absorbed by the typical trained athlete, if they're taking in the right things, which is basically just sugar, preferably. And if you do some gut training, which basically just means, like, in training, just figure out what the limit of your tolerance is. And then it's a little bit like graded exposure. If you're trying to overcome a phobia, or physical therapists know all about graded exposure. So you're just trying to just gently nudge that threshold upward. So each athlete is going to be at their own starting point, and they're also going to have, there's going to be some individuality in terms of what they tolerate well and what they don't. But generally, if you're looking for performance, if you're going to go out for a 6-hour bike tour, you probably can just eat like normal food, and it's healthier for you anyway. But if you're going for performance, like intensive workouts, races, you want to consume the products that were designed for that use, because they don't have anything in them except what you can benefit from. Anything that will get in the way of just, it's like rocket fuel for your muscles to take in, the gels and the sports drinks and the bars and that stuff. And so, just figure out where you are, and then try to increase it. But 120 grams per hour for events, other sports other than running, is kind of the new frontier.
Great question. Thank you. Great question, Brendan. Yeah, and a really important point, isn't it? The working or building up gradually, the progressive kind of, and also working, individuality again, seeing what works for you. Often in marathons, I don't know what it's like in the States, but in marathons, a number of runners I see who, a lot of marathons over here have got they've got a branded gel or something which is being given out at the stations, and the number of runners who just suddenly decide, you know what, I'm going to have one of those now, and just wrecks their stomach. Even if they're used to taking some kind of gel thing, they've got them in their belt, they'll just think they'll go for a different brand. Why not? Let's try it. It always happens, isn't it? Let's try something I've never done before in my training and see what happens. And that's it. They're just kind of like all sorts of bodily fluids coming out. So train, let your race just be exactly the same as what you've done in the training. Great question, Brendan, thank you for that. We've got lots of questions coming out. A question here from Gary. Gary Benson, founder of the STA, asks Matt Fitzgerald, how common are food intolerances and allergies in elite athletes, and how do they manage them, please?
Yes, good question. I believe I can't cite statistics, but I believe they're about as common as they are in the general population, which suggests that having food intolerances or allergies is not disqualifying toward becoming an elite athlete. So you can have these relatively common issues, and they're not going to prevent you. If you have the other tools, they're not going to keep you out of that club. When this topic comes up, I like to cite a really great paper that was published by a sociologist, actually, on allergies and intolerances. I may have cited it in a book or two, but the title of the paper is "I Can't Eat That." What the argument that this I don't have his name, unfortunately, but you can find it. Excuse me, the author of this paper, "I Can't Eat That." He says that most allergies and intolerances are actually cultural, that they're not physical, and that's why you see huge discrepancies in the rates of intolerances and allergies. Well, an allergy is an allergy, but really intolerances in different cultures. Like in Kenya, it's not a thing. If you say, "Oh, I have an XYZ intolerance," they'll look at you like you have two heads. It's like, I'm sorry, that's not a thing here. And his argument is actually it's sort of like a symptom of it's a symptom of affluenza. Like it's a way of, like, if you're so well off that you can refuse perfectly good food, it's a status symbol. So it's like, oh, I can't eat that, and that means you're rich because you can afford to turn away food, whereas folks in Kenya are like, no, that's food, I can eat that, and I'm going to. So I will say that in general, true food intolerances are not nearly as common as we'd like to think. That physical intolerances are only a fraction of the self-diagnosed claims of intolerance. But that being said, I can think of specific elite athletes who do have allergies and intolerances. Stephanie Bruce on the NAZ elite team that I train with has a litany of them. And she was definitely not one of those affluenza, I can't eat that types. Like, she loves to eat like everything, and she still does eat whatever she can, but she happens to have celiac disease and a lactose intolerance, or actually a full-on dairy intolerance. So, a lot of foods are just a no-go. She can't do wheat, she can't do dairy, but she does what she can, so she, even within those constraints, she obeys the eat everything principle.
And does pretty good.
Still
doing very good. I follow her. Fantastic. Yeah, amazing athlete. That's really interesting to hear. And again, it's going to hopefully defeat a lot of ideas that if you have got intolerances, well, you can never really take your chosen sport that seriously because you're held back by food. So we know someone like Stephanie Bruce is up there with that list of dairy intolerances, and that's really encouraging. Great question, Gary. Thanks for that. And actually, next week our guest will be Dr. Jill Hart, who we'll be talking about food intolerances and food testing and all that. So that'll be a whole hour of that next week. Great. Before I go on to another question, I just want to make sure we talk about these 5 principal habits, because each one has got some magnificent opportunities for you to spread your good word. So we talked about eat individually, so respecting differences, that people will eat according to maybe lots of other factors like culture and what works for you. Eat everything was a great one as well. So don't look at it as don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. The elites are getting as much of everything as possible to get that variety, which is looking at the physiology and the development of us evolutionary wise, and that makes perfect sense. But then I like the way you follow the eat everything in the book with the eat quality as well, because that kind of explains that it doesn't mean just drink 2 bottles of vodka every day. It's fine, you can eat everything. Yeah. So how does that quantify it, the eat quality?
Yes, eat quality is the big qualifier on eat everything. I didn't get a chance to, when I was discussing the eat everything principle, I didn't get a chance to mention to fully tie a bow on the idea that when I say everything, I mean everything. So most of the elite athletes I spent time with in researching my book consumed alcohol. Not obviously they weren't drunks, but they would have a glass of wine with dinner, like that sort of person. Most of them were in the habit of eating some kind of sweet, at least a few times per week, if not daily, some dark chocolate or that sort of thing. So, or just an indulgence in what we call French fries here in America, or, whatever, just like, food that's not good for you. So everything, when I say everything, I mean everything. Like, they were not like just so rigid where it was just like, oh no, I absolutely will not ever touch pizza. But the other thing you would notice, if you were studying the diets of elite endurance athletes, which I did, is like at first, like from, again, from a distance, that like what's on their plate looks very normal. It's like, well, doesn't everyone eat that way? Well, like, why do I care what the elites are eating? But then you take a couple steps closer and you notice that everything on their plate is unprocessed. So that is really the essence of what, for in the general public, when we talk about diet quality, we tend to think of like, like a good cut of meat versus a low quality cut of meat, that sort of thing. But in nutrition science, quality has a different meaning. And it just, the quality is defined by the results obtained from consuming that type of food. So they'll do this huge epidemiological studies where they look at diet patterns in hundreds of thousands of people, and then rates of various disease or health outcomes, like it could be like vegetable intake and cancer risk or whatever. And yeah, these studies are hard to do well, but there's a lot of them have been done, and there's some general agreement that it's no particular nutrient, or you can't point to anything particular in the makeup of foods that make them high quality in terms of their health outcomes. The thing that they all have in common is that they're unprocessed, that they're natural foods. So and it sort of reinforces the eat everything thing, because every single food type in its natural form is associated with positive health outcomes, with the qualified exception of meat. That's an area of hot debate. But even like seafood, so animal foods still like fit unprocessed. Seafood fits into the high quality category. As obviously fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, up and down, even dairy actually. So yeah, that's all that quality means, is like you should eat everything. But like most of what you eat should be in a minimally processed or unprocessed form. And there's lots of, I don't pay too much attention to like, like the whole obesity and weight management side of things. I'm really focused on performance, but there's really interesting research going on now in terms of diet quality, like processed, unprocessed, hyper processed, and their effects. And really, there's the growing consensus that is where it's at in terms of risk for becoming overweight or obese. It's like the less processed food you eat, whatever the other particulars, the less likely you are to become overweight.
Yeah, which again isn't really rocket science, is it? But
no.
It is really heavily integrated into lifestyle and fitting around a large family, kids, job, time to prepare food, cultures, the amount of time you put aside for lunch, going to sleep in the evenings, working at night times. It's the one thing which processed food helps, is you can suddenly squeeze it in, can't you, into this busy life we've got ourselves. So it's probably the hardest thing to change, which is why people do look for other fixes rather than just thinking, how processed is what I'm eating? They'll try and find excuses like, oh, when it was frozen it was really, really fresh, which sometimes works, but it's still looking for ways around it, doesn't it? Can I eat fresh unprocessed food now? Very interesting. Yeah, really cool. Okay, so eat everything, eat quality. We did eat individually. We've mentioned this a few times, and this kind of goes against a lot of kind of the fads out there, but it's still another one that is eat carb centered. So you mentioned carbs specifically, or in particular for endurance. That's still the way to go, is it? Carb is.
Yes. Yeah. Again, I know like how weirdly controversial it is to say that you should eat carbohydrate. But, when I traveled around the world eating with, a great variety of the world's most successful endurance athletes, and without exception, they were on carbohydrate centered diets, which I use that term rather than high carbohydrate, because I think it's actually more accurate, and it's just less loaded. I'm trying to cue people like, I mean something specific here. So, they just, their meals and snacks tended to be centered on high quality carbohydrate rich foods. And, you know, the research also, there's, again, like my approach is monkey see, monkey do, like, you know, eat like the guy who's winning, but it's not like I take my eyes off science altogether. And the science really does stand behind that. Again, like there's, you know, I mean, there's no perfect magical macronutrient ratio, you know, carbs, fat, protein that you have to nail in order to be successful. There's parameters that you need to operate within. And the most, you know, the one that needs to be most flexible is carbohydrate. So if you are completely sedentary, you need very, very little carbohydrate. You can get by with a very low carbohydrate diet. If you are like an athlete, you know, say an elite triathlete who trains 30 hours per week, you'd really better be on a very high carbohydrate diet. Like you will perform better. And there's pretty solid research showing that that's the case. You had this, you know, these kind of like bug-eyed low carb zealots out there just like trying so hard to prove that, you know, ketogenic diets were better for endurance performance. And, you know, it just, the studies just kept blowing up in their faces. And it's like, how many times do you have to see this before you change your tune? But, you know, if you just really want to, you know, minimize the risk that of dietary self-sabotage, you know, maintain a carbohydrate centered diet. Just make sure that all of your carbs, or almost all of your carbs, are unprocessed, that they're high quality carbs. You know, there's this tendency to think, oh, Matt's saying you should have, you know, ice cream and cotton candy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. It's like, no, Matt is not saying that. He's saying you should have whole grains and, you know, and fruit. You know, fresh fruit is full of carbs and that sort of stuff.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, you've just kind of said what I was going to say in terms of the 5 principles work together. As soon as that's the danger, isn't it? If you take one of them and just go straight into that and forget about the other 4, you could go down huge rabbit holes. But yeah, they all work very nice together in terms of eat carb centered, but make sure that it's, you know, not heavily processed, and make sure you're getting quality, and make sure you're not just having carbs and forgetting about everything else, because then you're not going to get your fats, and you do need some protein. So yeah, fascinating. And it's so interesting. I think people listening to this podcast, I hope there's some people there who feel a little bit deflated, who feel a little bit let down, because the truth does let you down sometimes, it seems, repeatedly, when it comes to what's the best way to look after ourselves. It's really hasn't got the bells and whistles of fresh new DVDs and acronyms and ways of doing stuff. But like I say, harder is putting it into practice. It's all very well knowing this, but probably the reasons why this simple advice doesn't happen is because it's pretty tricky to put into practice, like I say, because of lifestyles. But with that in mind, because we are getting to the bewitching hour now, I just want to let people know, obviously nutrition is something you've specialized and you look in, but the coaching is still going very strong. I just want to put up Matt's website. I've got clients who use the website. I'm forever giving it to people who have got runners or endurance athletes who are looking for some kind of guidance. Let me just put this up. We can still hear you, Matt, if we put it on full screen. So yeah, you probably heard of 80-20 before. It's become hugely popular. It's one of the kind of, again, people probably abuse it sometimes and misinterpret it, but it's a great principle and an easy way of remembering this website as well. Matt is the first person who says to admit that he didn't do the original research which came up with this, but in the book 80-20 for runners and for triathletes, then the research which came up with this is mentioned and everything. But yeah, 8020endurance.com is the website. If you're looking at the YouTube live feed now, and you can see the website there, so much on there, training plans, subscriptions, all sorts. There's a blog, loads of different resources. You've got zone calculators, workout libraries. It's just massive, because this guy's been doing it for a long time. He probably doesn't want to admit that, but there's a lot of years which have been going into the information which is on this website. So a really, really great resource, which I hope some of you will be able to forward on to your runners and have a look through yourself to get some great ideas. And it's going well, the coaching, is it, Matt?
Yeah, it is. It's funny, you know, my motto throughout my career has been swing at every pitch. And And just selling training plans online was just another of many, one of many pitches I swung at. Initially in 2006, I think that was when I built my first, online a la carte, download as you please training plans, and it just grew into a real international business. Like it's an American company, but 60% of our athletes are outside the U.S. A lot of them in the U.K. And it just keeps growing and growing. And it's kind of cool because, again, like, I didn't come up again with the 80-20 thing. I'm kind of the midwife for all of these great ideas I share. But the reason it's growing, it's very, like, we don't advertise or, it's just very word of mouth. And it's because like athletes are getting good results. It's because, most people, if they're just training on their own, they're doing it wrong. Like most people just make pretty basic mistakes, and, they're correctable. So feel pretty good that I'm not solving world hunger or anything, but helping athletes achieve their dreams, and is pretty satisfying.
And I guess it's a really great way to kind of see what you are saying and advising, you're putting it into practice, and I guess that helps you see that there's individuality, and you're not giving the same plan to all the runners, just the same as there's no one diet, there's no one workout which is going to help everybody run their 5k PB or something. So yeah, great stuff. And the books you produce as well, like I say, are brilliant. Normally in writing with another coach, it's Brad Hudson, is it Brad Hudson?
The new one? Is it the
I'm not going to the new one yet. The one I really like, which, because I'm old.
Brad Hudson.
I mean, that was brilliant. I mean, it's still on my shelf and thumbed through. In fact, I got two of them by mistake because I thought I'd lost one and bought another one. And yeah, but if I'm going to have two books, that's the one. The other one is Alex Hutchinson. Actually, I've got that as well. I've got two of his books. It's always a good sign to have two books. But yeah, the latest one as well, I haven't read yet, I'm going to admit. I think we were talking about earlier, it's not available on audio yet. Let me just bring it up. We can still hear you when I do put it on full. So Run Like a Pro, even if it's slow. I love your titles. I don't know how much thought goes into them, but they're just brilliant. But yeah, Run Like a Pro, even if it's slow. That is, I'm pretty sure it's available as a book on Amazon in the UK, but the order isn't quite there yet. If you're okay for time, it is 9:03. But yeah, I haven't read this yet, so I'm very excited. What's the idea behind that? What are people going to read in that?
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of where I just come straight at my core conviction, as an endurance sports guy, which is that anyone who cares enough about in this case running to want to improve should model their practices after what the elites do, with training, with diet, to mindset, to gear, to recovery, soup to nuts. And so I sort of, in the first chapter, I make the case that, hey, you're not so different from the folks who go to the Olympics. And then the rest is just, Ben and myself, tag teaming, just showing people how to do it. And everything is with the understanding that you have to scale, okay, maybe you don't have the capability to run 200 kilometers per week. In all likelihood, you don't. But you can still adhere to the principle that underlies that specific practice that the elites engage in. So we covered diet. There is a chapter on the nutrition component in there as well. So yes, I think it came out really well. So Ben and I have different voices. Like I do my sciencey thing, and then he jumps in as the elite coach in the trenches, working directly with these athletes to chime in from his perspective. And I think it's kind of a fun structure. And yeah, we've been getting good feedback on it.
Fantastic. No, I'm looking forward to reading it myself. And then the one before that, it's really nice the order you've done them in, because Running the Dream is you testing this out on yourself, where you did set this, what sounds like on the inset, ridiculous goal to try and beat a PB from, 13 years previous or something like that, by training and doing, it's just classic you. Not only just going to write about it, I'm going to go to war. I'm surprised you're not in Russia or Ukraine at the moment. That's what the sort of person you are. I'm going to the front line to actually test my theory about this new pistol I've got. So Running the Dream is amazing, people. It's a real roller coaster. It's just fantastic about Matt's training with the NAS Elite. with Ben Rosario as the head coach, and it takes you through his goal of getting a PB. I'm not going to ruin the ending or anything like that, but yeah, such an exciting book. I almost want to say, actually, I want to say, if you're going to read Matt Fitzgerald's book, go back to 2006 and start with Brain Training for Runners, and then go in order. It's like Jack Reacher; you've got to read them in order. You can't just pick anyone along the way. But if you're thinking, then I would probably read Running the Dream before Run Like a Pro, because it sets the scene so well, and you realise that the author is actually, he's got the medals, he's been there, and then the stuff which will come out, I imagine, Run Like a Pro will make a lot of sense. You don't have to. I'm not trying to get Matt a double sale here or an upsell like Larger Fries, but it would help if you do want to do it. I think it'd be a good way of doing it. Really excited about that. Right, okay, Matt, it's 9:06. I'm sure you got stuff to do. What time is it where you are? Where are you, in California at the moment, or?
Yes, yep, early afternoon here. So
okay,
yes.
You got the day ahead of you. Okay, right, well, so thank you so much for giving up your time. If people want more information, obviously they can go to the 80/20 Endurance website, or on social media. Are you Facebook mainly, or where do you you got Facebook groups, haven't you, or do you not try to avoid it?
I took a big step back in 2020 for mental health reasons. I'm there. I'm just not very active lately, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So probably the website's the best thing. Contact form there if they've got questions. But obviously, people, if you're interested, you can use this. If you're watching the YouTube video, use the comment section here to ask stuff. I will pass questions on to Matt. The same if you're wherever you're listening to this. If you're looking at on the Run Chat Live Facebook page, and leave some comments on there, and I will make sure that I can guarantee they get to Matt, and I'll do my best to get a reply. I'm sure he will. So Matt, before we go, people, just to remind you, next week on Focus on Nutrition does continue with Dr. Jill Hart, who's a leading UK biochemist and expert on diagnostic testing. So we'll be talking all about food intolerances there. I'll be interested to hear her views when I talk about a few things that Matt said tonight. That'll be next week, May the 24th, Tuesday, 8 o'clock GMT +1, if you're listening from outside the UK. But on behalf of Matt and myself, Matt, don't go away. I just want to say thanks to you. I'm just going to shut the lounge down. So on behalf of Matt and myself, thanks for joining us if you did join us live. And if you do download the podcast, then do please leave a rating. Take that 2 minutes out of your very busy schedule just to click your iPhone and just put 5. Don't even think about the 1 to 4. Just put a 5, simple. Just put great. That's all I need. Because it just helps get the word out there. Okay, we rely on you doing that, because then if people put a search in, we appear higher, and the incredibly fantastic educated word of our guests gets to more people, which is what it's all about. So thanks for joining us, people. Thank you, Matt, once again, and we'll see you all next Tuesday at 8 o'clock GMT.